Windows Server Administration topic 2 is server management. And server management also looks at Active Directory domain services, and Active Directory certificate services. So server management, right. The classic way, or the most common way that I know about managing a Windows server is with the server manager. So when you first start your Windows server, and we'll do this later on today in the labs, it automatically loads up an application called Server Manager, and this lets you manage the server. But there are other methods now, and there always have been other methods to manage a server. So here are the other ways. PowerShell provides a secure shell, so you can SSH into a server and run commands. The remote server administration tools actually allow you to install Server Manager on a client machine and manage a server on a different machine from that client machine. And Windows Admin Center is a web browser-based configuration tool, and that's the newest way to manage a Windows server. Now, we would install this, but you can't actually install Windows Admin Server at present on a domain controller. So we have a server that's we're going to promote it to being a controller of a domain today, and that means we can't install Windows Admin Center. So we'd have to install another Windows server and then install Windows Admin Center on that. So that's the newest method. So those are the different ways: PowerShell, Server Manager, remote server administration tools, and Windows Admin Center. There used to be a way to do it through the CMD shell, but that's no longer used. So last week, I talked a little bit about server roles, and a role is just a feature or a part of the server that you can enable. Okay, and once you enable it, that server then can perform the tasks within that role. So some of the most common roles that we have are DHCP server, the Windows web server is called IIS, Windows deployment services, DNS, file services, Hyper-V. What we do is we add our roles and features. We add roles and features using the Add Roles and Features wizard. And that's something we're also going to look at today. So the kind of main topic of this week is Active Directory. So what actually is the Active Directory? It's a Windows directory service, but then that leads you to the question, what is a directory service? Well, a simple way to think about a directory service is maybe like the Yellow Pages or the phone book, where you can look up. It's a record of different people and various attributes associated with those people. So Active Directory is the Microsoft way of allowing users to log in to a Windows domain. It provides security and a hierarchical organization of a Windows domain. So we're going to look at this in a little bit more detail, but the structure of the Active Directory is that there's a tree-like structure, and everything within that tree is an object. So here's some of the most common objects here. We have a domain that we're going to configure today, a computer, a user, a group, sometimes called a security group, and some other slightly more abstract things like certificate templates and subnets and sites. So these are some of the more common ones up here. So objects, Active Directory structures are arrangements of information about objects, and objects fall into two categories: resources or security principles. So another name for a group in Windows, or the full name for a group in Windows, is actually a security group. So because there are other types of groups, there is exchange groups as well. So whenever we talk about groups in the Active Directory, we're talking about security groups. So certain objects can have other objects inside them, like groups or like organizational units. So a user can be a member of a group. So that would be like an object inside an object. The object's uniquely identified by its name and usually has a set of attributes, and these will be key value pairs, and they're stored in a database. Now, if an object gets deleted from the Active Directory, it goes into a place called the Active Directory recycle bin. Okay, and you can actually set how long this object stays in this recycle bin for. And that length of time is called the tombstone lifetime. All right, sounds a lot more interesting than it is. The tombstone lifetime is just how long something stays, how could you say, in the grave, perhaps, in its tombstone. All right, and that's in the Active Directory recycle bin that happens. So, domains, right? What is a domain? Well, simply, if you think about it, a domain is kind of similar to a kingdom. All right, a king would have a domain, or a queen would have a domain. A domain could be a website. You can own your own domain name. And Active Directory domains are managed by a computer that's called a domain controller, DC for short. So a domain such as example.com must be reachable by DNS for the device computers to log in. So when you walk into a library or into an office and you do Control-Alt-Delete and you put in your username and password, you're actually sending that to a domain controller to see if you're allowed to log in to that domain. A domain has a global catalog that contains information about every object within that domain. So, different types of objects. Organizational units serve two purposes. They link group policy objects, which we will look at in topic 5, to the domain, and they delegate responsibility to a group of users for administration. Groups are different from Active Directory objects. Groups are actually called security groups, and therefore granting permissions to a set of users. Now, a user can be in many groups, but a user can only be in one organizational unit. So think of organizational units as dividing containers and groups as for security control. So that's a real key thing to know, that a user can be in many groups. You could be in the technical support group, the IT group, the IT help desk group, all at the same time. But you can only ever be in one organizational unit. Okay, maybe Edinburgh staff would be your organizational unit. So let's have a look at some directory structure examples. Here we have a domain that's linked here to another domain, and that's actually called a forest. All right, and multiple domains linked beside each other is called a tree. A little bit more exciting than it actually is, trust me. So within a tree, within a domain, we have an organizational unit. Okay, so those are some structure examples. Over here we have another one. Here's a domain with lots of organizational units inside it, and inside that organizational unit we have various objects, users and computers. And this little line joining the two domains together is something called a trust. All right, you can get a two-way trust, a one-way trust. That's a bit beyond the scope of this course. So I found this wonderful diagram online. Many thanks to whoever created it. And this is a brilliant illustration of what a big domain might look like. So here's our parent domain. Let's imagine this is example.com, the name of your company.com, example.com. And inside example.com, we have all of these objects. And inside those objects, we have users. And those users can be logging in. And here we have some delegation happening. And Michael is allowed to reset passwords. John has full control. And all of this can be managed. All of this is the Active Directory. Okay, all of this stuff is all managed by the Active Directory and by the domain controller. So this, in essence, is a Windows network. This is what a Windows domain looks like. And often I've been told in the past, if we think that of Cisco networks as kind of being almost down at the physical layer, layers 1, 2, and 3, this is more like a kind of layer 7. This is more like an application layer network. So if you imagine Cisco being at the bottom of the OSI model, this is more like at the top of the OSI model, all of this stuff here. So objects in the Active Directory have parameters, okay? They have some values. Each object has values. So an object like a user will have a username. The username would be Michael. It would have a password. It would have a group. So here's an object here that I'm creating with PowerShell using the command new AD object. I'm giving it a name, 192.168.1.0/26. The type, it's a subnet. The description is literally what it is, and some other attributes are added on. So that's an example of what an object looks like at the kind of command level. So Microsoft Directory Services, there are different types of directory services. The one that we're going to use and the one we're going to set up, and the most common in my opinion, is this: Active Directory Domain Services, shortened to ADDS. So ADDS, it even says it here, is the cornerstone of every Windows network. It stores information about members of the domain, including the devices and users. It verifies their credentials and identifies their access rights. Now, some other lesser known ones are lightweight directory services, ADLS. This is used in a branch office network where you don't have a domain controller. So if you just have a small branch office, you could install lightweight directory services. Certificate services is for creating a public key infrastructure. And we'll look at that in a little bit more detail later on. ADFS, Federation Services, is used for single sign-on. So sometimes you might want to set up, if you go into an office and you sign in, and then you go to another service when you're logged in and it automatically signs you into that service, that's called single sign-on, SSO. So those are some of the different directory services. Right, AD-REP-L status, quite a difficult one to say. This is the Active Directory Replication Status tool. And it's a small but handy tool that Microsoft published for download, which you can use to analyze the replication status of Active Directory environment. And it's useful to look for replication errors, help administrators resolve replication errors, and allow replication data to be exported. So if someone said to you, what would you use to check the replication status of the Active Directory? The answer would be the AD-REP-L status tool. Okay, Active Directory Replication Status Tool is the answer. Okay, the last part today is about Active Directory Certificate Services. So Active Directory Certificate Services actually allows you to turn a Windows server into a certificate server. And that certificate server will let you set up a public key infrastructure so you can generate certificates. It can also be used for wireless network security, VPNs, and the certificate server that you set up is called a certificate authority. So let's have a look at some of the stuff that ADCS provides. We can create digital certificates. And we can check that we can provide confidentiality, integrity, authentication using Active Directory Certificate Services. Now, what we're not going to do, you'll be pleased to know, is actually set this up, because I've tried to set this up in a lab before and it literally takes 2 hours of clicking on menus and clicking OK. And at the end of it, really, you don't really have much to show for it other than it says, well done, you have set up certificate services. So just some of the key terminology we need to be aware of in terms of passing a Microsoft exam would be, what is a standalone certificate? server. A standalone certificate server is sometimes called an offline certificate server. And this is literally just one server that you use to sign certificates. And another name for it is a root authority. So what you might want to do often is set up some kind of certificate issuing server and keep it offline, keep it out of the domain. For security purposes, you don't want anyone to be able to hack into it. So that would be a standalone root authority. Now, a server that gets its authority from a root authority is called a subordinate server, and that just means it's below a higher authority. An enterprise server is just one that's inside a domain rather than being standalone. And finally, the final thing that's useful to know is a thing called a CRL, CRL, and that's a certificate revocation list. So let's say you have a lot of servers and you create certificates for them all. And then you take one of those servers and you end of life it, and you throw it in a skip, and someone sneaks into that rubbish pile, sneaks in there, gets a hold of the server and climbs back into your office through the window and plugs it back in. If you revoked the certificate of that server, the rest of the servers in your network will not trust the server. So I've worked in a place before where they had certificates for everything, right down to even a single port on every switch. Every switch port had its own certificate. And that just added an extra layer of security. So you couldn't just come on with a faked MAC address and plug them in. You couldn't just plug any old device. As well as having the switch port security and the sticky MAC addresses, they also had certificates for all the different devices that plugged into switches. So this is something that can come into play in a very large enterprise network. Okay, so that's the end of topic 2, and those are the things that we need to know. So I'm going to stop the video now, see if there are any questions, and we shall have a look at lab 2. Okay. Lab 2 of server administration is entitled ADDS, Active Directory Domain Services. And in this lab, what we will do is we will set up ADDS, coincidentally, given that that's the name of the lab. So I've just talked about ADDS, but the best way to learn about something is to actually do it. I hope everyone agrees. And what we're going to do here is, it just says, ensure you have a server and client machine and you have verified ICMP connectivity from the server to the client. This should have been established at the end of lab 1. So if you've got lab 1 up and running, you're ready to hit the ground running with lab 2. So what we're going to do, this is just if you need a backup, all right? You can create a full clone of the server. I'm not going to do this just now because I know that I'm not going to do things wrong. But if you're worried that you might break something, it's handy to do a backup here, a clone. And I believe last week we already did the static IPs 10, 10, 10, 1 and 10, 10, 10, 2. So we're pretty much sorted for this. This should be, part 1 should be fairly easy, set the environment. Part 2, we're going to add on the Active Directory role and the DNS role. So I'm just going to open VMware now. Over here, I have VMware, and I have my Windows 10 client from last week. Let's just resume that. And I have my Windows Server 2019 server from last week. We can see there's the pings working. So let's just get that going again. Now, I'll just shut down my other machines here. Windows 10, Debian. So we've just got these two. And let me just pause this for a second. So here we are in Server Manager, which is the home of where we're going to configure the server. And we're going to select option 2, add roles and features. Now, you'll see down the bottom here, we've got these 3 roles. These are installed by default, but what we're going to do is we're going to add on some more role tabs to the server. So let's add roles and features, and this add roles and features wizard will show up on the screen. So what I like to do is tick this box so we don't see this silly page again, because this is just telling you what this wizard is. So let's skip this page after this. Now, okay, we want to do a role-based or feature-based installation, and if we had multiple servers, we would choose which one we want to install it on. So we're going to select this server from the pool of 1 servers that we have. Now, this is how you add all roles to Windows Server. Okay, you choose an option here, and the one we want to add is Active Directory Domain Services. Okay, and let's just click Add. So that's ticked. It doesn't do any harm as well to add the DNS server role here as well, although that will if you don't do that, that will happen automatically anyway. So let's click Next here, and just leave anything that's ticked there. Let's just leave that as default. And then this is going to take us into the Active Directory setup. Now, it's good to tick this box here to restart the server automatically if needed during the setup. And then let's just hit install. So that's really it for the installation of the server. Let me just pause the recording just now. Resume recording. Okay, so we have the feature installation complete, and if we just click close, we should see now that within Server Manager we now have 2 new roles. Okay, Active Directory Domain Services and DNS. And up at the left here we have a shortcut to reach the kind of configuration panel for each of them. Now, if we jump over to the lab here, you'll see that it says there should be a flag at the top with a yellow exclamation mark. So if we go back to Server Manager, we'll see there, what's this? A flag with a yellow exclamation mark. Okay, so if we click there, something should pop up. Oh, let's just click again. Okay, it now says promote this server to a domain controller. So this is going to take us into the wizard to promote this to being a domain controller. So let's click there to launch this. Okay, now we want to add a new forest. Okay, and the root domain name of the forest we want to add is going to be called ec.com. Okay, then we click next. It should just be all about accepting defaults. Now, I want you to use the same password that we've used for the other things so that we don't get locked out of this in future. Okay, and then leave everything here as default. Now, why is it not? Oh, they're different. Hold on. Capital E. Must have typed this one in wrong. $, capital E. All right. Click next. Okay. Yes. A delegation cannot be created because the authoritative parent zone. Right. Just leave that as it is. Net BIOS name should automatically populate in here. We give it a second to sort itself out. Yep, EC is absolutely fine. And then the rest of the stuff should all be default. Leave those as they are. This will generate a PowerShell script. You can view that. The prerequisites check. Hopefully we'll pass everything and we'll just have some advisory conditions. But we'll let it run. It's prerequisites check. Now, if you're failing, okay, so it's just giving us some complaints about the DNS server, but we can sort that out with the DNS role wizard shortly. So let's just going to go back and just check this. See, it won't let me tick that box because ticking that box would resolve it. But let's just get to the end. of the prerequisites check. Okay, next, very good, very good. And then this should just let us click install, and this should install and set up the new domain with the authoritative domain name ec.com. So let's just hit install there. And don't worry about, it's only when you have red errors that you have a problem. So a delegation cannot be created. You should manually create a delegation in the parent zone. See, usually it automatically does the DNS zone, but we'll see what happens when this is completed. So let me just pause again. Okay, so now it's telling me that we're about to be signed out. The reason we're about to be signed out is because up until now we were working locally on the server. So let's close, and the Windows server is going to restart. And at this point, we are going to be logging into our new domain. So hopefully this is quite snappy here. Just thinking about it. Resume. Okay, so what you might notice now is we're no longer logging in as administrator. We're now logging in as the NetBIOS name /administrator. So we're logging into the domain now. We're no longer logging into just the machine. So hopefully I got the password right. This is where you find that you've locked yourself out of the domain controller and you need to reinstall the whole thing. Hopefully not. So how do we know that we have this set up correctly? How do we know? Well, there's a couple of ways we can test that the domain has been configured correctly, and hopefully any errors with DNS would have been resolved when we rebooted the machine. So we're not getting any errors coming up here. If we go to local server, errors that appear usually show up in this little events kind of problem area here. We can see now that we have a domain called ec.com. If we do OpenCMD and we do ping ec.com, all right, you can see that the server is replying. So the server is now a DNS server for the domain ec.com. Okay, so that shows that this is working. Now, over on our client machine, if we were to ping ec.com, there you go. The server is replying 10.1.1.1. Okay, so that shows that we've got DNS resolution. Okay, the DNS name ec.com is being resolved in this domain to 10.1.1.1. And that means that this client machine is ready to join this domain. So before we join the client machine to the domain, I'm going to show you how you go in and manage the Active Directory. Go to Tools and Active Directory Users and Computers. And then in Active Directory Users and Computers, we open up ec.com, our domain. And then if we go to users, or if we right click on ec.com and do new, we can add a user here. So let's add a user called Bob. Okay, last name Bob. And we're going to make his user logon name Bob. And then we'll have to set his password. So let's do password never expire. Hang on. Password never expires. And let's just give him a password of $. Edinburgh College, capital E. I think that should work. Next, okay, Bob. His username is going to be bob@ec.com. Password never expires. If we now do here and do refresh, okay, in the users container, we should see Bob in here somewhere. So let's just do, sometimes you have to go all the way. There he is there, Bob. We added him at the domain level. Okay, let's minimize. And now we're ready to go over to the client and add the client machine to the domain. So let's just go, we want this client machine to be a member of a domain, and we want to put in ec.com. and we know that this can reach the domain controller. Let's just click OK. And here we go. This window shows that it's working. Username, administrator, password, put in the administrator password for the domain, and then hit OK. And then this magical window, there we go. Welcome to the ec.com domain. You must restart. So let's get this restart in. Close, restart now. Back to the server. And in the server, we can now go to Tools, Active Directory, Users and Computers. And if we go to Computers, we should see over here that there's our desktop machine. All right, so it can be seen within the domain. And the very, very last part of Lab 2 is just to log in as a domain user. And we're going to log in as Bob to the domain here. So let's do send Control-Alt-Delete. And we're going to do other user. We don't want to log in as the default local user anymore. And it's saying sign in to EC. Okay, so we can actually do EC/Bob. Okay, and password. Let's just pop in Bob's password. And sign into EC. Just check I've put that in right. Edinburgh College with a capital E. Here we go. And here's Bob signing into the domain. This is Bob's first day at work, first day in the new office. There's Bob logged in to the EC domain. And if we were to do something like system properties on this, it would show that this is a member of the ec.com domain. All right, if I do cmd and we do an ipconfig/all, we can see that this is a member, primary DNS suffix ec.com.